My name is Amber, and at 32 years old, I found myself standing in a law office, staring at the mother who abandoned me 16 years ago. She wore designer clothes, now her face perfectly made up, acting like she owned the place. Beside her stood Kyle, my half-brother, checking his expensive watch impatiently. They hadn't seen me in 16 years yet. Here they were, ready to claim millions from Uncle Thomas's estate. Before I share what happened next, where are you watching from? If you've ever faced family betrayal, please subscribe and hit the like button to support others going through similar pain. The last time I saw my mother, Margaret, I was 16 years old, living in our modest house in Columbus, Ohio. Back then, life wasn't perfect, but I thought we were a family. Margaret had married Richard when I was 8, and 2 years later, Kyle was born. Richard owned several car dealerships across Ohio, and we moved into his large suburban home. From the outside, we looked like the perfect blended family. But inside those walls, the truth was different. Richard never hid his feelings about me. I wasn't his biological daughter, and he made sure I knew it every single day. When Kyle got new toys, I got hand-me-downs from garage sales. When Kyle had birthday parties with 50 kids and professional entertainers, mine were quiet dinners, if Margaret remembered at all. She used to defend me in the beginning, telling Richard that I was her daughter too, that I deserved equal treatment. But as Kyle grew older and Richard's business became more successful, something changed in her. I remember the shift happening gradually. Margaret stopped asking about my school days. She forgot parent-teacher conferences. When I made the honor roll in 10th grade, she barely looked up from helping Kyle with his elementary school homework. "That's nice, Amber," she said, her attention already back on her biological son. Richard would smirk from his leather recliner, satisfied that his wife finally understood who really mattered in this family. The only person who seemed to care about me was Uncle Thomas, my biological father's younger brother. My real dad had died in a construction accident when I was 3, leaving behind nothing but memories I couldn't even recall, and a brother who refused to let me disappear. Thomas worked as a mechanic at a small garage downtown. His hands always stained with motor oil. His smile always genuine when he saw me. He'd show up every few weeks, usually when Richard was at work, bringing me little gifts like books or art supplies, things he knew I loved but never received at home. "How's my favorite niece doing?" he'd ask, even though I was his only niece. He'd sit with me on the front porch, listening to my stories about school, about the creative writing contest I'd entered, about the teacher who said I had potential. Margaret would watch from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable, while Kyle played with his expensive gaming system in the living room, the sound effects echoing through the house. My 16th birthday fell on a Thursday in March. I woke up that morning expecting nothing special, maybe a card from Margaret if she remembered. The house was quiet when I went downstairs for breakfast. Margaret was making Kyle's favorite pancakes, the smell of butter and syrup filling the kitchen. Kyle sat at the table already dressed in his private school uniform, scrolling through his phone. "Morning," I said, grabbing a piece of toast from the counter. Margaret didn't turn around. "Richard and I need to talk to you tonight," she said, her voice strangely formal. "Be home right after school." I spent the entire day at school with a knot in my stomach. Maybe they were getting divorced. Maybe Richard had finally convinced her to send me to live with Thomas. My best friend Jenny noticed my distraction during lunch. "You okay?" she asked, but I just shrugged, unable to explain the feeling of dread growing inside me. When I got home that afternoon, there were boxes in the hallway. Not moving boxes, but the kind you use for storage. Margaret was in the living room with Kyle and Richard, travel brochures spread across the coffee table. California sunshine beach houses, palm trees covering every glossy page. "We're moving," Richard announced without preamble. "I've bought a chain of dealerships in San Diego. Better opportunity, better climate, better schools for Kyle." I stood there, backpack still on my shoulder, trying to process this information. "When?" I managed to ask. "Tomorrow," Margaret said, still not meeting my eyes. "The moving truck comes in the morning." I remember feeling relief mixed with panic. We were leaving, starting fresh. Maybe in California things would be different. Maybe without the familiarity of this house, Richard would treat me better. "I'll start packing right away," I said, already mentally cataloging what I needed to take. "You should," Margaret said, finally looking at me. There was something in her expression I couldn't read. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I stayed up until 2 in the morning, carefully packing my clothes, my books, the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my biological father. I wrapped the photo of him and Uncle Thomas in tissue paper, placing it safely between my sweaters. I even packed my school supplies, thinking about the new high school I'd be attending in California, wondering if they had a creative writing club. The morning light woke me. My alarm hadn't gone off, which was strange because I'd set 3 of them to make sure I didn't oversleep on such an important day. The house was eerily quiet. I jumped out of bed still in yesterday's clothes and ran downstairs calling for Margaret. The living room was empty. The kitchen was clean, no breakfast dishes, no coffee brewing. Richard's study door stood open, revealing vacant shelves where his awards and certificates had been displayed. I ran to the garage. Both cars were gone. "Mom," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. "Kyle, is anyone here?" That's when I saw it, a single piece of paper on the kitchen counter held down by the house key. My hands shook as I picked it up. Margaret's handwriting, usually so neat, looked rushed. "Amber, you're old enough now. Richard doesn't want you coming with us. Your Uncle Thomas knows you're here. Good luck." Good luck. 16 years of being her daughter, and all I got was good luck. I must have read that note 50 times, trying to make the words change, trying to find some hidden message that would explain this was all a misunderstanding. I called Margaret's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called it again and again until the automated message became burned into my brain. I tried Richard's office number, but his secretary said he was no longer with the company, that he'd relocated to California. I don't know how long I sat on the kitchen floor still clutching that note. The doorbell finally broke through my shock. Uncle Thomas stood on the porch, his work uniform wrinkled like he'd slept in it, his eyes red-rimmed and furious. "I just got off the phone with the landlord," he said, pulling me into a hug. "He said the lease is up next week and nobody renewed it. Amber, honey, what's going on?" I showed him the note. I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief to rage. He crumpled the paper in his fist, then smoothed it out again, as if he needed evidence of what his sister-in-law had done. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "You're coming home with me." I lived with Uncle Thomas in his 2-bedroom apartment above the old bakery on Parsons Avenue. The place smelled like cinnamon rolls in the morning and motor oil in the evening when he came home from work. It was a far cry from Richard's suburban mansion, but it was the first place that felt like home in years. Thomas gave me his bedroom and set himself up on the pull-out couch, refusing to hear any arguments about it. Those first few weeks were the hardest. I'd wake up thinking I heard Margaret calling me for school, only to remember she was 2,000 miles away, pretending I didn't exist. Thomas tried to get custody officially transferred, but Margaret had already filed paperwork claiming I was with my uncle voluntarily. She hadn't abandoned me, the document said. She'd made arrangements for my care with a family member. Technically, it wasn't illegal, just cruel. I threw myself into school and work. Thomas's salary barely covered rent and utilities, so I got a job at the grocery store bagging groceries after school and on weekends. I learned to budget, to clip coupons, to make dinner for 2, stretch into lunch for tomorrow. Thomas would come home exhausted, hands black with grease, and find me doing homework at the kitchen table with dinner warming on the stove. "You don't have to do all this," he'd say, but I could see the gratitude in his eyes. We were surviving together, building something from the ashes of abandonment. He never said a bad word about Margaret in front of me, but I heard him on the phone sometimes late at night when he thought I was asleep. "How could you just leave her? She's a child, for God's sake. She's your daughter." The conversations always ended the same way, with him hanging up in frustration, Margaret apparently unmoved by his appeals. School became my refuge. My English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed the change in my writing after I moved in with Thomas. My stories became darker, more complex, exploring themes of abandonment and resilience. She pulled me aside one day after class. "Your recent work is powerful, Amber," she said. "Pain can be a profound teacher if we let it. Have you thought about applying for the state writing scholarship?" I hadn't, but Mrs. Patterson helped me put together a portfolio. When the acceptance letter came with a full ride to Ohio State University, Thomas cried. I'd never seen him cry before, not even when talking about my father, his brother. "Your dad would be so proud," he said, holding the letter like it was made of gold. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo." We celebrated with pizza from the place around the corner, the one that gave you extra cheese if you were a regular. Thomas raised his soda can in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, and for the first time since Margaret left, I believed in them. College opened up a world I hadn't dared to dream about when I was that abandoned 16-year-old girl. Ohio State's campus sprawled before me like a promise, each building representing possibilities that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. I majored in accounting with a minor in creative writing, a combination that made my advisors raise their eyebrows, but made perfect sense to me. Numbers were certainty, writing was freedom, and I needed both to build the life I wanted. My freshman year roommate was Lisa Chen, a pre-med student from Cleveland, whose parents called her every Sunday like clockwork. She'd put them on speaker while folding laundry, their voices filling our tiny dorm room with questions about her classes, her health, whether she was eating enough. At first, those calls made my chest ache with envy, but Lisa noticed my discomfort. "Want to go grab coffee during my parent check-in?" she offered one Sunday. "No," I said, surprising myself with my honesty. "I think I need to learn to be okay with other people having what I don't." Lisa sat down on my bed, her laundry forgotten. "Tell me," she said simply. And I did. The whole story poured out from Richard's coldness to Margaret's abandonment to Thomas's rescue. Lisa listened without interrupting, without offering hollow platitudes. When I finished, she said, "Your mom lost out. Her loss, not yours." We became inseparable after that. Lisa taught me that family could be chosen, that friendship could fill some of the hollow spaces Margaret had left behind. She brought me home for Thanksgiving that first year, and her parents treated me like a second daughter, loading my plate with food and asking about my studies with genuine interest. But it was the work that saved me. I threw myself into every opportunity that came my way. I worked at the campus bookstore during the day, tutored statistics in the evenings, and picked up freelance bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. My professors began to notice my drive. Dr. Hamilton, who taught advanced corporate accounting, pulled me aside after a particularly complex exam that I'd aced. "Have you considered the Big Four?" he asked, referring to the major accounting firms. "I have contacts at Ernst & Young. They're looking for summer interns." The internship led to a job offer before I even graduated. The starting salary was more than Thomas made in 2 years at the garage. When I told him, he insisted on taking me to the fanciest restaurant in Columbus, even though I knew he couldn't afford it. "Let me do this," he said when I protested. "It's not every day my niece becomes a corporate hotshot." The pride in his eyes made me excuse myself to the bathroom, where I cried happy tears for the first time in years. My career trajectory exceeded even my ambitious goals. I worked 80-hour weeks without complaint, volunteering for the assignments nobody else wanted, building a reputation as someone who could solve the impossible problems. By 25, I was managing major accounts. By 28, a tech startup called Novatech recruited me as their CFO, offering a salary that made my colleagues' jaws drop and stock options that could make me wealthy if the company succeeded. It did succeed beyond anyone's wildest predictions. We developed a revolutionary supply chain management software that Amazon bought for $200 million. My stock options alone netted me $3 million after taxes. The first thing I did was pay off Thomas's mortgage on the little apartment above the bakery. The second was buy him a new truck, replacing the rust-covered pickup he'd driven for 15 years. "I can't accept this," he said, standing in his driveway, staring at the gleaming Ford F-150. "You gave me a home when my own mother wouldn't," I replied. "This truck is nothing compared to that." He hugged me then, and I felt him shake slightly, emotion overwhelming his usual stoic demeanor. Despite my success, or maybe because of it, I kept our Sunday dinner traditions sacred. Every week, I'd drive to Thomas's apartment and we'd cook together, usually something simple like spaghetti or grilled cheese. We'd talk about everything and nothing: the garage, my work, his attempts at online dating that always ended in disaster. "Maybe I'm meant to be a bachelor," he'd joke. But I saw the loneliness sometimes, the way he looked at families in restaurants. "You've got me," I'd remind him, and he'd smile, that gentle smile that had saved me at 16. What I didn't know was that Thomas had been taking my financial advice seriously. Very seriously. When I'd mentioned cryptocurrency over dinner one night, explaining Bitcoin in simple terms, he'd invested $5,000 of his savings. When I talked about the real estate market recovering, he'd bought a small rental property with the profit from his crypto investment. He never told me any of this, just listened and acted, building wealth quietly while maintaining his simple lifestyle. One Sunday, about a year before everything changed, Thomas seemed different, contemplative. We were sitting on his small balcony watching the sunset paint the Columbus skyline orange and pink. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked suddenly. I didn't need to ask who. "Sometimes. Less than I used to." "Margaret called me last week," he said, and my stomach dropped. "Richard's business is struggling. She hinted they might need help." "You didn't?" "Of course not," he said firmly. "I told her she made her choice 16 years ago. But, Amber, I want you to know something. If she ever comes back, if she ever tries to claim you owe her anything, you remember that you owe that woman nothing. Not forgiveness, not money, not even acknowledgement. You built yourself up from the ashes she left behind." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, unsettled by his intensity. Thomas looked older, suddenly tired. "Just promise me you'll remember. No matter what happens, remember who was really there for you." I promised, not knowing those would be some of the last words of advice he'd ever give me. 3 weeks later, Thomas collapsed at the garage. Massive heart attack, they said. Gone before the ambulance arrived. I got the call during a board meeting, my assistant's face white as she pulled me from the room. The drive to the hospital was a blur, my mind refusing to process what I'd been told. This couldn't be happening. Thomas was only 58. He was healthy. We had dinner plans for Sunday. The doctor was kind, but direct. There had been nothing anyone could do. A widowmaker heart attack, they called it. Quick, probably painless. As if that made it better. As if anything could make losing the only real parent I'd ever had better. I handled the arrangements in a fog. Thomas had left instructions practical as always. Simple service cremation, scatter his ashes at the lake where he and my father had fished as boys. The funeral home was surprised when I insisted on the best of everything. The most beautiful urn, the most elegant service room, the most extensive obituary in the Columbus Dispatch. "He would have said it was too much," Lisa said, standing beside me as I signed the papers. "He never did anything excessive for himself in his entire life," I replied. "Let me do this for him now." The service drew more people than I expected. Mechanics from the garage, customers whose cars he'd fixed for decades, neighbors from the apartment building. They all had stories about Thomas's quiet kindness, how he'd fixed cars for free when families couldn't afford repairs, how he'd helped carry groceries for the elderly woman downstairs, how he'd been teaching the neighborhood kids basic car maintenance in his spare time. "He talked about you constantly," his boss from the garage told me. "Every achievement, every milestone. You were his whole world." I stood at the podium to deliver the eulogy, looking out at the sea of faces, and realized that Thomas had built his own family, a community of people he'd helped without ever asking for recognition. My voice broke only once when I said, "Thomas saved me in every way a person can be saved. He was my uncle by blood, my father by choice, and my hero by example." Kyle and Margaret never showed up. I hadn't expected them to, hadn't even known how to contact them if I'd wanted to. But their absence still stung, another reminder that Thomas and I had been alone together in this world, and now I was just alone. After the service, as I was gathering the sympathy cards and flowers, a man in an expensive suit approached me. "Miss Amber, I'm James Johnson from Johnson & Associates law firm. Thomas was my client. We need to discuss his estate." I almost laughed. Thomas's estate consisted of his apartment, his truck, and maybe $20,000 in savings if he'd been frugal. "Can we do this next week?" I asked, exhausted beyond measure. "I understand this is difficult timing," Johnson said carefully. "But there are other potential beneficiaries who need to be notified. The will reading is scheduled for next Friday at 2 o'clock. Thomas was very specific about the timing. Other beneficiaries. Maybe the garage guys I thought, or the elderly neighbor he'd helped. I agreed to the date, too tired to argue, too heartbroken to care about whatever small bequest Thomas had left behind. The morning of the will reading arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I'd taken the day off work, something I rarely did, but facing Thomas's final wishes required more strength than reviewing quarterly reports. I dressed carefully in a black suit Thomas had always said made me look like a CEO, wanting to honor him even in this small way. Johnson & Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all marble and mahogany and hushed voices. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to compose myself before facing whatever sentimental items Thomas had parceled out to his friends. The receptionist offered me coffee in delicate china that rattled against the saucer when my hands shook. I was studying the abstract art on the waiting room wall, trying to find patterns in the chaos when the elevator chimed. The sound of expensive heels on marble made me turn and my blood turned to ice. Margaret walked in wearing a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than Thomas's monthly salary. Her hair perfectly styled her face, showing artistic traces of cosmetic work. Behind her, Kyle strutted in designer jeans and an Armani jacket, checking his Rolex, as if he had somewhere more important to be. They didn't notice me at first. Margaret was speaking into her phone loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, darling, we'll be in the Bahamas by Monday. Just have to handle this tedious family matter first." She laughed, a tinkling sound I remembered from my childhood when she was trying to impress Richard's business associates. Kyle slouched into a chair, immediately pulling out the latest iPhone. "How long is this going to take?" he complained. "I have a meeting at 4. That's when Margaret's eyes found mine. For a split second, I saw recognition flash across her face, followed quickly by something that might have been shame before it was replaced by cool indifference. She ended her phone call and sat down across from me, crossing her legs elegantly. "Amber," she said, as if we'd last spoken yesterday instead of 16 years ago. "You look well." I stared at her, words failing me. She looked older, of course, but preserved in that expensive way wealthy women manage. Kyle glanced up from his phone, studied me for a moment, then dismissed me as unimportant. He'd been 12 when they left. I wondered if he even remembered the sister he'd lived with for a decade. "Nothing to say to your mother?" Margaret asked, a slight edge creeping into her voice. "You stopped being my mother the day you left me with a note." I replied, proud that my voice remained steady. Before Margaret could respond, Johnson appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for you now." The conference room was imposing with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbus skyline. 3 other people were already seated at the long table: Thomas's boss from the garage, our elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, and a man I recognized as the owner of the bakery below Thomas's apartment. They nodded at me sympathetically. Margaret and Kyle took seats at the far end, acting as if they owned the place. Johnson cleared his throat. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Thomas Anderson, dated 6 months ago. Before we begin, I need to verify everyone's identity and relationship to the deceased." He went around the table. The garage owner, the neighbor, the baker, all friends who'd known Thomas for years. Then he reached Margaret. "Margaret Hamilton, formerly Anderson," she said smoothly. "Thomas was my brother-in-law." "And you've had regular contact with Mr. Anderson?" Johnson asked, something sharp in his tone. Margaret shifted slightly. "We've maintained family connections over the years." Johnson made a note, then looked at Kyle. "And you are Kyle Hamilton. Thomas was my step-uncle, I suppose." "Have you ever met Mr. Anderson?" Kyle shrugged. "When I was younger." Johnson's expression gave nothing away as he made another note. Finally, he looked at me. "Amber, you resided with Mr. Anderson from age 16 to 18, then maintained regular contact until his death," I said clearly. "Very good." Johnson opened a leather folder. "Before I read the specific bequests, I should inform you all that Mr. Anderson's estate is more substantial than might be expected. Through various investments and property holdings, the total value is approximately $8 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face. 8 million. How was that possible? Thomas lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and drove an old truck. He wore the same work clothes for years and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. Margaret's gasp was theatrical. Kyle dropped his phone. Even the other beneficiaries looked shocked. "That's impossible," I said. "There must be some mistake." Johnson smiled slightly. "No mistake. Mr. Anderson was a very prudent investor. He followed financial advice from someone he trusted implicitly and made several fortuitous investments over the past 5 years. Now shall we proceed with the bequests?" My mind reeled as Johnson read through the smaller gifts. $50,000 to the garage for an employee emergency fund. 50,000 to Mrs. Chen for her medical expenses, 100,000 to the bakery owner to expand his business. Each recipient was tearfully grateful, sharing memories of Thomas's kindness. Margaret grew increasingly impatient, with each bequest her foot tapping against the floor. When Johnson paused to turn the page, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "This is all very touching," she said, "but perhaps we could move on to the family bequests. Thomas surely understood that blood relations take precedence." "Interesting that you mentioned blood relations," Johnson said mildly. "Mr. Anderson was quite specific about that topic. To Margaret Hamilton, he leaves the following message: 'You chose money over blood when you abandoned Amber for Richard's wealth. I choose blood over money by leaving you exactly what you left her: nothing.'" Margaret's face went white, then red. "That's ridiculous. I'm his sister-in-law. Kyle is family. You can't just cut us out." "To Kyle Hamilton," Johnson continued as if she hadn't spoken, "Mr. Anderson leaves $50, the exact amount of birthday money he tried to send you for 10 years, all of which was returned unopened." Kyle's mouth fell open. $50? From $8 million. This is insane. Johnson looked at me. "To Amber, who has been my daughter in every way that matters, I leave the remainder of my estate, totaling approximately $7.5 million after the other bequests." The room exploded. Margaret shot to her feet, her composure completely shattered. "This is fraud. She manipulated him, a lonely old man, and she took advantage. We'll contest this." "On what grounds?" Johnson asked calmly. "Mr. Anderson was of sound mind. I have medical documentation, video recordings of the will signing, and multiple witnesses to his mental capacity." "She's not even his real family," Kyle shouted, finally engaging now that money was involved. "I'm related to him by marriage." "And when was the last time you spoke to Mr. Anderson?" Johnson asked. Kyle faltered. That doesn't matter." "It does, actually. I have here a letter Mr. Anderson wrote to be read in the event of a contest." Johnson pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with wax. He broke it open carefully and began to read in Thomas's voice, somehow channeling the man I'd loved like a father. "If you're hearing this, it means Margaret or Kyle is contesting my will. Let me be clear. I am of sound mind, body, and spirit as I write this. I have $8 million to leave behind, money earned through smart investments based on advice from Amber, who never knew I was following her financial guidance. Margaret, you abandoned your 16-year-old daughter with nothing but a cruel note. You chose Richard's money over your own child. For 16 years, you've pretended she doesn't exist. You never called, never wrote, never sent a birthday card. When I begged you to reconsider, you told me Amber was not your problem anymore. Kyle, you're a stranger to me. Your mother made sure of that. The few memories I have of you are of a spoiled child who treated Amber like a servant in her own home. You've grown into a man I don't know, and frankly don't care to know. Amber is my family. She's the daughter I never had, the legacy of my beloved brother, and the only person who loved me without condition or expectation. She worked 3 jobs to help with expenses when she lived with me, never knowing I was saving every penny she contributed, investing it for this moment. She succeeded despite being thrown away like garbage by the woman who should have protected her above all else. This money belongs to her. If you contest this will, my lawyer has instructions to use estate funds to fight you every step of the way. I've also instructed him to release certain information to the media about Richard's business practices and Margaret's abandonment if you persist. Yes, Margaret, I know about Richard's bankruptcy. I know about the fraud investigation. I know you're here because you're desperate, not because you ever cared about me. To Amber, if you're hearing this, know that every dollar is yours, free and clear. You saved me when you came to live with me. You gave an old bachelor purpose and joy. You are my daughter. My pride and my greatest accomplishment was being there when you needed me. Live well, love freely, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve every good thing that comes your way. With all my love, Thomas." The letter ended, and the room was silent except for Margaret's harsh breathing. Her perfectly composed face had crumbled mascara running in black streams down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of grief or remorse. They were tears of rage and frustration. "This isn't over," she hissed, grabbing her designer purse. "Richard has lawyers, the best lawyers money can buy." "Richard is bankrupt," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the will reading began. I know because Novatech considered buying one of his dealerships 6 months ago. The forensic accounting we did showed he's been underwater for 3 years, hiding it through creative bookkeeping. The IRS is investigating him for tax fraud. Margaret's face went ashen. Kyle looked between us, confusion replacing his earlier arrogance. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Dad said business has never been better. We're opening new locations." "Your father lied," I said simply. "Just like your mother lied when she said she'd maintained family connections with Thomas. Just like you both lied to yourselves, thinking you had any claim to his money." Johnson intervened smoothly. "Mr. Anderson anticipated this situation. He asked me to make you both an offer. Sign away any claims to the estate today, and Miss Amber has been authorized to give you $50,000 each as a goodwill gesture. Refuse and fight this will, and you'll get nothing but legal bills." Margaret laughed bitterly. $50,000, that's insulting. "It's $50,000 more than you left me with," I pointed out. "You were 16, you were fine." Margaret exploded. "You had Thomas. I had to think about Kyle's future, about our family's stability." "I was your family," I said, standing to face her. "Your first child, your daughter. And you threw me away because Richard told you to." "You don't understand," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "Richard said he'd leave if I brought you. He said he'd take Kyle and disappear. I couldn't lose my son." "So you chose to lose your daughter instead." The words hung in the air between us. For a moment I saw something flicker in Margaret's eyes. Regret, Shai, but it was quickly replaced by calculation. 75,000 each, she negotiated. "And we signed today. The offer is 50,000, Johnson said firmly. "And it expires in 5 minutes. Kyle stood abruptly. "This is bull. Come on, Mom, we don't need her charity." But Margaret remained seated, her designer facade crumbling. "We need that money, Kyle," she said quietly. "Your father. The house is being foreclosed. The cars have been repossessed. We have nothing." Kyle stared at his mother in shock. "What? But you said we were going to the Bahamas on Monday." "I lied," Margaret admitted. "I've been lying for months. We came here because I thought Thomas would have left us something. He was always so kind, even after—" "After you abandoned his niece," Mrs. Chen spoke up suddenly, her elderly voice sharp with disgust. "Thomas told me everything. How you left that poor girl with nothing. How he took her in and raised her right. You have some nerve showing up here now." The garage owner nodded in agreement. "Thomas was the best man I knew. He'd give anyone the shirt off his back, but he had no patience for cruelty. And what you did to that girl was cruel." Margaret flinched at each condemnation. She looked at me once more, and for the first time in 16 years, I saw my mother. Not Richard's wife, not Kyle's mother, but the woman who had once sung me lullabies and braided my hair for school. "I'm sorry," she whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Are you?" I asked. "Or are you sorry you're broke? Sorry Thomas didn't leave you millions? Sorry your plan didn't work?" "All of it," she admitted. "I'm sorry for all of it." I studied her for a long moment, this stranger who had given birth to me. Then I made my decision. 50,000 each. Sign the papers now and never contact me again. That's my only offer." Margaret nodded quickly. Kyle protested, but she grabbed his arm. "Sign the papers, Kyle. It's more than we deserve." Johnson produced the documents with remarkable efficiency. As Margaret signed her name, her hand trembled slightly. Kyle signed with angry slashes of the pen. When it was done, Johnson handed them each a check. Margaret stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Amber, your uncle would be proud of you." "I know," I said simply. "He told me so every Sunday for 16 years. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then walked out, Kyle trailing behind her, still complaining about the unfairness of it all. The conference room felt impossibly quiet after they left. The other beneficiaries excused themselves one by one, each stopping to hug me, or press my hand, murmuring condolences and congratulations in equal measure. Soon it was just Johnson and me, surrounded by legal documents and the weight of Thomas's final gift. "He loved you very much," Johnson said, gathering his papers. "I've been his lawyer for 10 years, and you were all he talked about. Your graduation, your promotion, that big sale to Amazon. He kept every newspaper clipping, every photo." I never knew about the money, I said, still processing the magnitude of it. He lived so simply. Johnson smiled. He said simplicity was freedom, but he wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He said you'd already survived abandonment. Once he wouldn't let life abandon you again. I signed the final papers in a daze, accepting the responsibility of Thomas's fortune. Johnson handed me a small key. Safety deposit box, he explained. Thomas said you'd understand what to do with the contents. That evening, I went to the bank alone. The box contained exactly what I expected: every report card I'd ever brought home to him, every honor roll certificate, the program from my college graduation photos of us at our Sunday dinners. At the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name in his careful handwriting. My dear Amber. The letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just become wealthier than either of us ever imagined. Please don't feel guilty about the money. Every penny came from following your advice. Though I never told you I was listening so carefully when you talked about markets and investments over our spaghetti dinners. I need you to know something: taking you in wasn't charity or obligation. It was the greatest privilege of my life. You brought light into my lonely existence. You gave me purpose when I thought I'd spend my life as a bachelor mechanic with grease under his fingernails and regrets in his heart. Watching you grow from that broken 16-year-old girl into the phenomenal woman you've become has been better than watching any investment portfolio grow. You didn't just survive what Margaret did to you. You transformed it into rocket fuel for your success. I've left you money, but you already have everything that matters: integrity, compassion, intelligence, and grit. Use the money however you see fit. Help others the way we helped each other. Or buy yourself something frivolous for once in your life. God knows you've earned it. Don't waste time on anger toward Margaret. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She made her choice and has to live with it. You made yours, and look where it led you. Live well, my daughter. Love freely. Take chances. Make mistakes. Do all the things I was too cautious to do. And every once in a while have spaghetti on a Sunday and think of me. All my love, Thomas P.S. There's something else in this box you should see. I looked back in the safety deposit box and found another envelope, older, yellowed with age. Inside was a letter in different handwriting and a photograph. The photo showed two young men by a lake holding fishing poles and grinning at the camera. One was Thomas, barely 20, his hair still dark and full. The other was a man who looked exactly like me around the eyes and nose. My father. The letter was dated a month before my father died. Tommy, if anything happens to me, please watch over Amber. Margaret means well, but she's weak. She'll follow whoever provides security, even if it means sacrificing what matters most. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only one I trust to step in if needed. Amber is special, Tommy. She's got Mom's spirit and your stubbornness. She'll do great things if someone just believes in her. Be that someone if I can't. Your brother, David. I sat in that cold bank vault and sobbed. Not the gentle tears of grief, but the ugly, body-shaking sobs of someone who finally understood the full weight of love and loss. My father had known. Somehow he'd known what might happen, and had asked Thomas to be my guardian angel. And Thomas had answered that call, without question or hesitation. I left the bank with the photos and letters clutched to my chest, feeling both hollowed out and filled up at the same time. The money suddenly felt insignificant compared to these pieces of truth, these evidence of love that had surrounded me even when I felt most alone. Over the next few weeks, I settled Thomas's final affairs. I kept his apartment above the bakery, unable to let go of that last piece of him. I donated his truck to the garage for their apprentice program. I created the Thomas Anderson Foundation with $2 million, focusing on helping abandoned teenagers age out of foster care or difficult family situations. The first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old girl named Maria, whose parents had kicked her out for being gay. When I handed her the check for her first year of college, she cried and asked why a stranger would do this for her. Because someone did it for me, I told her. And someday, you'll do it for someone else. Word of the foundation spread quickly. I received hundreds of applications, each one a story of resilience in the face of abandonment. I read every single one, seeing myself in their words, their pain, their determination to succeed, despite being thrown away by the people who should have loved them most. Margaret tried to contact me once about 3 months after the will reading. She sent a letter to my office, a long rambling thing about mistakes and regrets and second chances. I read it once, then filed it away. I didn't respond. Thomas was right. Holding on to anger was poisonous, but that didn't mean I had to invite her back into my life. Kyle posted about me on social media, calling me a gold digger who had manipulated an old man. The post went viral briefly, but the backlash was swift when people learned the true story. Several of Thomas's friends commented with their own memories of how Margaret had abandoned me and how Thomas had stepped up. Kyle deleted the post and his entire social media presence within a week. I heard through professional channels that Richard's legal troubles had intensified. The IRS had frozen their assets, and they were living in a small apartment in Riverside, California. Margaret had gotten a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Kyle was working at a car dealership, not as an owner or manager, but as a junior salesman. They were surviving just as I had once survived. 6 months after Thomas's death, I met David. He was a pediatric surgeon who volunteered at a youth shelter, where the foundation was hosting an event. He approached me during the cocktail hour, not knowing who I was, and started talking about one of his patients who had aged out of foster care and was struggling to afford college. There should be more programs for kids like him, he said passionately. Kids who've been failed by every system meant to protect them. I agree, I said, handing him my business card. Send me his information. The foundation can help. David looked at the card, then at me, his eyes widening. You're Amber, the Amber who started all this. Guilty, I said, and something about his genuine awe made me blush. We talked for 3 hours that night, long after the event ended. He'd grown up in foster care himself, bounced between homes until a teacher took interest and helped him get a scholarship to medical school. He understood abandonment, understood the drive to prove yourself worthy, understood the complicated grief of losing someone who chose to be your family when your blood relatives wouldn't. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant where we shared spaghetti and talked about Thomas. David listened to every story, laughing at Thomas's terrible jokes, tearing up when I described finding the letters in the safety deposit box. He sounds like he was an incredible father, David said. He was, I agreed, the best father a thrown-away girl could ask for. A year later, David proposed at that same Italian restaurant. I said yes, and my first thought was how much Thomas would have liked him. We married in a small ceremony at the lake where Thomas's ashes were scattered. I swear I felt him there in the breeze off the water and the sunshine that broke through the clouds just as we exchanged rings. Margaret sent a wedding gift to my office, an expensive crystal vase with a card that said, "Wishing you all the happiness you deserve." I donated the vase to the foundation's silent auction and used the money to buy books for a group home library. Life moved forward. David and I bought a house in the suburbs not far from where I'd lived with Margaret and Richard all those years ago. Sometimes I drove past that old house now owned by a young family with 3 kids and a dog. Their bikes littered the driveway where Richard's Mercedes used to sit. Their laughter echoed where silence had once reigned. We started trying for children. And when the pregnancy tests kept coming back negative, when the fertility treatments failed, when the doctor said it was unlikely to happen naturally, I thought about abandonment in a new way. Was this the universe's way of preventing me from potentially abandoning a child, the way I'd been abandoned? David held me through those dark thoughts, reminding me that being a parent wasn't just about biology. Look at you and Thomas, he said. No shared DNA, but more of a parent-child bond than most biological families ever achieve. We started the adoption process specifically requesting older children who'd been in the system for years. Our first placement was a 13-year-old boy named Marcus, whose mother had chosen drugs over him, whose father was in prison. He arrived at our house with one garbage bag of possessions and eyes that trusted nothing and no one. It took months for Marcus to believe we weren't going to send him back. The first time he called me mom accidentally, then immediately apologized. I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom. When I came back, I told him about Thomas, about being abandoned, about choosing your family. So you get it, Marcus said quietly. You actually get it. I get it. I confirmed. And I'm not going anywhere. 2 years later, we adopted siblings Sarah and James, aged 10 and 8, whose parents had died in a car accident and who'd been bounced between relatives who didn't want them. Our house filled with the chaos of 3 children with homework and soccer practice and music lessons, and all the beautiful noise of a family built on choice rather than chance. Today marks exactly 10 years since that day in Johnson's conference room. I'm standing in my kitchen making Sunday dinner for my family, the same spaghetti Thomas used to make. Marcus is home from college for spring break studying pre-law at Ohio State. Sarah is practicing violin in the living room preparing for her high school orchestra concert. James is at the kitchen table struggling with algebra while David patiently walks him through each problem. The doorbell rings unexpected on a Sunday evening. I wipe my hands on my apron and answer it, finding a young woman on my porch, maybe 19 or 20, with worn clothes and desperate eyes. "Are you Amber?" she asks hesitantly. "The one who runs the Thomas Anderson Foundation." "I am," I say. "How can I help you?" Her story spills out in a rush. Parents who kicked her out for getting pregnant, a boyfriend who disappeared, a baby on the way and nowhere to go. She'd heard about the foundation from a social worker taken 3 buses to find my home address from public records. "I'm sorry to bother you at home," she says, tears streaming down her face. "I just didn't know where else to go. Everyone says you understand what it's like to be thrown away." I look at this young woman, seeing myself at 16, seeing every abandoned child I've tried to help, seeing the cycle that continues generation after generation. Then I open my door wider. "You're not bothering me," I say firmly. "Come in, have you eaten? We're just sitting down to dinner." David appears behind me, taking in the situation with one glance. "I'll set another place," he says simply because he understands too. The girl Ashley hesitates on the threshold. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," I tell her. "Someone once opened a door for me when I had nowhere else to go. That's what we do. We open doors." As Ashley sits at our dinner table, nervously twirling spaghetti while my children chatter around her, I think about Margaret. I heard she and Kyle moved back to Ohio last year, that Richard died of a heart attack in prison, where he was serving time for tax fraud. Part of me wonders if she ever thinks about that 16-year-old girl she left behind with nothing but a note. Part of me wonders if she knows what I've become, what Thomas's love and faith created from the ashes of her abandonment. But mostly I don't think about Margaret at all. She's a ghost from another life, a cautionary tale about choosing money over love, security over loyalty, convenience over conviction. She taught me in her cruelty the most valuable lesson of my life. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're at your lowest, who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself, who claims you when the world throws you away. Thomas was my family. David is my family. Marcus, Sarah, and James are my family. Every kid the foundation helps becomes part of an extended family of survivors and thrivers. Even Ashley, sitting at my table with spaghetti sauce on her chin and hope dawning in her eyes, is family now. After dinner, as I'm showing Ashley the garage apartment we converted for foundation recipients in transition, she asks me something no one has ever asked before. "Do you forgive her?" "Your mother." I consider the question carefully. "I don't hate her anymore," I finally answer. Hate takes too much energy. But forgiveness. Forgiveness implies a relationship worth salvaging, and we don't have that. She's a stranger who gave birth to me, nothing more. Thomas was my parent. He earned that title through years of showing up, through choosing me every single day when she couldn't choose me even once. "That's sad," Ashley says softly. "No," I correct her. "What's sad is that she missed out on knowing me, on watching me grow, on being part of this life I've built. Her loss, not mine. I got Thomas instead, and that trade worked out pretty well for me." That night, after Ashley is settled in the apartment after the kids are asleep, David and I sit on our back porch watching the stars. He takes my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "You did a good thing tonight," he says. "Thomas would have done the same," I reply. "No," David says gently. "Thomas did do the same. 16 years ago, he opened a door for a desperate girl with nowhere to go. And now that girl opens doors for others. That's his real inheritance, not the money. The money just makes it easier to keep more doors open. I lean into my husband's warmth, thinking about cycles and choices about abandonment and acceptance, about the family you're born into versus the family you build. Somewhere out there, Margaret is living with the consequences of her choice, growing old, without her daughter, without grandchildren, without the love she traded for a security that proved false. And here I am, surrounded by chosen family, by the legacy of a mechanic who lived above a bakery and loved his brother's daughter like his own. The money he left has helped hundreds of abandoned kids find their footing. But the love he showed me, that's helped me build a life worth living, a family worth having, a future worth fighting for. Tomorrow, I'll go to the foundation office and review applications. I'll find more kids who've been thrown away and help them see they're worth keeping. I'll continue Thomas's work of turning abandonment into opportunity, rejection into resilience. And every Sunday I'll make spaghetti and remember the man who saved me in every way a person can be saved. The truth is, Margaret did me a favor when she left me behind. She freed me to find my real family, to become who I was meant to be, instead of who she would have forced me to become. In choosing Richard's money over me, she inadvertently gave me something worth more than any inheritance: the knowledge that love isn't about obligation or blood or staying because you have to. Love is about choosing someone even when walking away would be easier. Love is Thomas working extra shifts to pay for my school supplies. Love is Sunday dinners when we were both too tired to talk but showed up anyway. Love is $8 million invested secretly because he believed in my advice more than I believed in myself. So to answer the question Ashley asked, no, I don't forgive Margaret. But I thank her. Thank her for leaving so Thomas could find me. Thank her for teaching me what family isn't so I could recognize what family is. Thank her for the abandonment that became my foundation, literally and figuratively. As David and I head inside, I stop by the mantel where Thomas's picture sits next to my father's. Two men who never got to grow old together, but who conspired across death to make sure I was loved. I touch the frame gently, a ritual I perform every night. Thank you, I whisper, meaning it with every fiber of my being. In the photo, Thomas smiles his gentle smile, and I swear sometimes I can hear his voice. You're welcome, kiddo. Now go live that beautiful life you've built. You've earned every bit of it. And I do. Every single day, I live the life Thomas made possible, not just with his money, but with his faith in a broken 16-year-old girl who just needed someone to choose her. He chose me when my mother wouldn't. He saved me when I thought I was unsavable. He loved me when I thought I was unlovable. That's the real inheritance. Thomas left me the knowledge that we're all worth saving, we're all worth choosing, we're all worth loving. And now I spend my life proving him right, one abandoned kid at a time, one open door at a time, one Sunday dinner at a time. Margaret wanted millions she had no right to, but Thomas left me something worth more than all the money in the world. He left me the certainty that I was loved truly and completely by someone who chose to be my father when my mother chose to be nothing at all. And that's the greatest inheritance anyone could ever receive. I hope my story resonates with those of you who've been abandoned, rejected, or told you're not enough. You are enough. You've always been enough. Sometimes it takes losing the family you're born into to find the family you're meant to have. And sometimes if you're very lucky, that family is just one person who sees your worth when everyone else has written you off. For me, that person was Thomas. Who was yours? Or maybe you're meant to be that person for someone else. Either way, remember, this blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Choose wisely who deserves your loyalty. And never, ever be ashamed of walking away from people who walked away from you first. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have given Margaret and Kyle anything at all? Have you ever had to choose between blood family and chosen family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that being abandoned doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. It just means you were freed to find better love elsewhere. Please remember to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about resilience family. and the complicated paths we take to find where we belong. Your support helps us reach others who might be struggling with their own family situations and need to know they're not alone. Thank you for being here, for witnessing my journey from abandoned teenager to a woman who learned that the best families are often the ones we build ourselves. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love. You deserve to be chosen. And sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is leaving so the right person can find you.